The COVID-19 pandemic has put many Americans out of their jobs. As for now, more than 17 million Americans have filed for unemployment benefits in the past month. A rapid and unprecedented deterioration in the U.S. economy. Can the coronavirus cause a major collapse in the U.S. financial system? Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Leila Faromazi, and in this episode of The Outbreak, we'll be discussing the pandemic's impact on the U.S. economy.
The number of Americans seeking unemployment benefits continued to surge at unprecedented levels, bringing the total number of applications to nearly 17 million since the coronavirus pandemic shut down large parts of the U.S. economy. This is the number for just 3 weeks and what the government has announced. Many economists say the actual job losses so far are almost certainly greater, and that there is wide agreement that they will continue to mount. The U.S. Federal Reserve increased its efforts to aid the unemployed Americans with an ambitious plan to help companies and state and local governments gain access to funding.
At the Fed, we're doing all we can to help shepherd the economy through this difficult time. When the spread of the virus is under control, businesses will reopen and people will come back to work.
But it is unclear when people will receive such funding. As for now, what it will take to stabilize the economy is no more than guesswork.
I'm collecting unemployment right now, but unemployment doesn't get your bills paid, you know. So right now I'm okay, but I don't know what a month's going to bring from now.
The purposeful and sudden halt in economic activity has no precedent, and no one knows when the restrictions on movements and commerce will be lifted.
You have a government shuts down the private sector economy. You have millions of out of work. The next shoe to drop is going to be millions of people call in for unemployment benefits, crashing the system that handles the unemployment benefits, because you've had a 100-fold increase, which is what has happened. We have 1,000 people who are now working on just personnel for that incoming system. Think about that, 1,000 people who are working on processing applications for unemployment benefits. That was like the number we used to get of applicants. Now we have 1,000 people processing applications. We're working with Google to come up with an online mechanism.
Several economists expect that by the end of the month, more than 20 million Americans will have been thrown out of work, pushing the unemployment rate in the U.S. towards 15%. In February, it was just 3.5%. What will happen then? What if this trend continues for the next couple of months? The majority of Americans are getting poorer, and it's not just about paying bills or buying food. What if they get sick? Can they afford medical bills as well?
Economists say the U.S. unemployment rate is now 13%, the worst since the Great Depression. Whatever the White House is planning to do, it better hurry. Let's discuss this issue further with our guests. Today's guest is Logan Kelly, professor of economics and also the chair of the Department of Economics at the University of Wisconsin, River Falls. Hello, Logan. Welcome to the show. For how long do you think the U.S. government can sustain the shutdown of its major economic sectors? Can Washington afford this massive unemployment rate?
Well, there's a couple of questions there. The first thing is not long. Obviously, we can't just simply shut down our economy forever. However, I think it's really important to note that the reason why we're shutting the economy down is the health concern. We want to make this shock as short as possible, and the best way to do that is to continue with the shelter-in-place orders that we have. So in some sense, I would say, we need to do it as quickly as possible, but as quickly as possible is really obeying these shelter-in-place orders. However, when we talk about can we afford this, there's a certain amount of can we afford not to. We can't afford to not flatten the curve, as the colloquialism has become, right? We have to be able to keep our health system from being overtaxed. So that's the first thing. The second thing that is going on is how do we get people through the short stint? Hopefully we can keep it as short as possible. How do we get them through? And that's where the CARES Act and hopefully other stimulus is going to come in to try to bridge that gap. And hopefully that's all we're doing is bridging a gap. As far as can we afford it? Well, this really highlights the necessity to not run deficits during times of expansion. If we run deficits during times of expansion, it makes it very difficult for us to run deficits during times of contraction, or in this case, economic emergency.
Thank you, Professor. Talk to you again later. The U.S. now faces the sharpest rise in unemployment in its history, a surge that is already highlighting income inequality across the country and comes as the global economy goes into a nosedive that is likely to exacerbate the situation in the months ahead.
Large parts of the U.S. are now on lockdown. Millions of people working in retail, restaurants, travel, hotels, and leisure industries have lost their jobs, and the losses are spreading. Oil and gas companies are laying off workers as oil prices collapse, and engineering firms, including General Electric, are cutting staff as the airline industry grinds to a halt. The layoffs were widespread, with losses reported in almost all sectors of the economy, from leisure and retail to construction and manufacturing. Economists warned that the country's gross domestic product, the broadest measure of the goods and services produced, could fall this quarter at an annual rate of as much as 35% from the preceding 3 months. Experts say the stimulus package from the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve will soften the shock to some degree, but with business restrictions and closures still in place, the coming weeks will likely reveal more people facing income and job losses.
I helped a young man yesterday. He was just like, I was making $1,500 a week. He was just like, and I'm about to get $200 a week in unemployment. Like, how am I supposed to take care of my family? And I think that is the bigger fear with mental health too. Just like, I've always been able to provide.
The numbers and the dramatic forecast prompted many authorities to call for reopening of businesses in a desperate attempt to save the economy. They've called for a national discussion about what it will take to reopen the economy. Some have suggested masks and 6 feet social distancing remain in place until widespread testing or a vaccine is available, but experts urged caution about moving too quickly to reopen.
The real problem for us will come in 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, maybe even more, as if there is a recession or if people are less generous because of what their stock market portfolio may look like. I worry about what our end of the year giving will look like, what our budget in 2021 will look like. So yes, it's important to support Reconcile and other nonprofits now, but it's also important to be as consistent as people can going forward.
Government's sweeping new loans program will provide $2 trillion in additional loans to small, medium, and large companies, as well as cash-strapped states and cities. Still, the gravity of 1 in 10 Americans suddenly being out of work is hitting families and communities across the country. Several cities have experienced modern-day bread lines, with lines of cars stretching over a mile long, as people wait to visit food banks and restaurants handing out free meals.
Voices of discontent keep rising across the U.S. Let's see what people have been posting on social media about this issue. Many people blame the U.S. president for such high unemployment rates, such as Max. Then there are also those people who believe the latest statistics show how the U.S. government's ignorance is awful for the fate of workers. That's Summer Lee. In the meantime, there are Americans such as Asterix who don't believe the official numbers. They say the unemployment rate is much higher. All right, so what can Americans expect next? Is Washington capable of tackling the COVID-19 pandemic and the unemployment crisis at the same time?
So what's the future like for the U.S. job market after the pandemic is over? Experts say the forecasts are bleak. They say the damage looks likely to be much deeper and longer lasting than seemed possible even a week ago.
People have said, yes, we know the economic data is bad. As a matter of fact, it's so bad we can't really get close to estimating what the numbers are going to look like.
While big businesses can survive months of closure, small ones do not have the financial buffer to pay workers for long if revenue dries up. And while larger public companies may have access to cash, They also have shareholders who want executives to watch the bottom line. In simple words, you can't have all expenses and no revenue. That is why there is a group of economists that strongly believe that the outbreak could eliminate 3 million jobs in America by summer. History has shown us that crises like pandemics, economic collapses, and world wars have at times ended up reordering societies. There were outcomes like shrinking the gap between the rich and the poor, or empowering the working class. The Black Death helped end feudalism. The Great Depression helped lead to the New Deal. In fact, historians say that extreme economic inequality has never shrunk in a meaningful way without existence of a major crisis. As of now, the coronavirus pandemic is not on the order of the plague, but is hitting the United States during a period of agitation about worsening inequality and waning power for workers. Already, it has made stark how precarious life is for many American workers, causing some to revolt. How employers and policymakers respond could improve work in the United States for the long term or make the existing problems worse.
Let's bring in our guest again to see what his insights are about this issue. Good to have you back, Professor. A lot of analysts think the U.S. has not managed to handle the pandemic well and that this country will not be considered a power in future. Do you believe that?
Well, we've certainly done a few things wrong, but we've also done a few things right. If we look at the state and local level, we see a fairly significant widespread compliance with stay-at-home orders, with some exceptions, but fairly widespread compliance with it. We also see people just pitching in, helping one another out. One place where I think we could certainly have improved would have had a more unified central voice, all right, national voice and leadership as to where we're going to do and how we're going to respond to the pandemic, and particularly have this go on sooner. One of the things that we could say we certainly should do better in the next time that this happens, and let's face it, there will be a next time. Viruses are always mutating and improving themselves, and so we have to do the same. The next time that this happens is to recognize the gravity of the situation and start responding to it much, much earlier.
Thanks for the contribution, Professor Logan Kelly from River Falls, Wisconsin. That's it for today. Don't forget to watch our next program. I've been Leila Faromarzi, and on behalf of the whole team here, thanks for watching. And look after yourselves and each other.